Hi, I'm here to talk on behalf of Internet NZ, who's the parent organisation of my organisation, NZ Registry Services, who are proud to be the Platinum sponsor for tonight. Internet NZ has a long commitment to open source, which goes back to its inception. In fact, all of the software that we use to run .nz with is open sourced, and that's over $2 million worth of investment alone. Recently, Internet NZ has sponsored the Mix and Mash Supreme Award for recognising the contribution of developers. So we're going to continue to support open source. It's part of our goal of an open and uncapturable internet. So a little bit then about how I ended up here. I never started off as a political open source person, but experience has made me quite passionate about things, and if I get a bit passionate tonight, apologies. I remember back in the 1980s when people used to write their own text editors, and you used to get multiple competing versions of just about everything. And to say it irritated me is to put it mildly. It was, in my view, an unnecessary repetition. And I soon developed basically a pathological hatred of it. It was a fundamental waste of human resources that everything needed to be repeated. There was no advancement of humankind within it. Now, competition, of course, can be good, we know that, but not always. We don't want competing traffic light systems. We don't want competing police forces and things like that. And it's the same thing with knowledge. Software, ultimately, is just knowledge written in a computer language. And the need to have multiple competing different ways of doing exactly the same bloody thing is just irritating. There is no need to reinvent the wheel, okay? It's not progress at all. Now, years ago, people started with public domain software. That was very good, that was very important, but it got exploited. There are rumours that I couldn't possibly substantiate about a large company based in Redmond that managed to rescue its operating system at a critical time by using somebody else's TCP/IP stack within that software. And that if they hadn't done that, they would have missed the internet. That was this huge thing they hadn't really spotted, and they wouldn't be worth anything now. Okay? Public domain was good, but it was only a start. Then came open source, and I, for one, certainly saw it for what it was. It's a way to lock in progress. It's a way to ensure that we move on to the next level. There are so many things that people have done that I just don't want to bother with. Thank you very much. That goes into the past. I'm interested in the future, how we move into the future. And the way to move into the future is to learn from what we've done in the past. And with something like a new field, like software development, then this is the right way to start. Now, you're probably thinking, well, what's Internet NZ doing talking about this? Where's the link between the open source and the internet? The internet was built on open source and open protocols, absolutely fundamentally entirely. The RFC series of documents are open protocols. Every time you send an email, you are using an open protocol that was invented by somebody in the 1980s. Okay? That is what made the internet, and that is a large part of what is making the information society today. Open source still runs key parts of it. We run a key part of it, .nz, and that runs on open source entirely. But there are more bits. Network time is run on open source. And everybody needs to use time. It's a fundamental thing. If we didn't have it, it wouldn't work, and sort of networking stuff, and that's all open source. Now, I have a belief that comes from experience. This isn't an evangelical point of view, that openness with the internet is more than just a foundation. It's an emergent property of the internet. It is something the internet produces and sustains and strengthens. And we now see from the internet more than just open source. We have open data, open communications, open business and other things, all of which improve humankind. And this combination is only going to get stronger as open source develops. But it's not all going to be plain sailing, we know that. There are still some battles to be fought. And the big one, the really evil one, of course, is patents. Now, we know that they're a major threat to open source. Now, okay, we think they're largely dealt with in New Zealand, but this is a global market, so we're all going to begin to struggle with this at some point. I think everybody, when they first use a computer, gets a shock at some point. They begin to recognise how easy it is to copy something, and then begin to realise that that's not actually necessarily a legal act. Everybody then begins to get surprised that control extends beyond the physical into the virtual world, that there's as much control in cyberspace as anybody can actually go out to try to create for it. And, well, let's just take a step back and look at patents and where they came from. There is a claim that patents were invented to incentivise innovation. You know, that people needed to have big ideas after years of work, and that patents would enable that to monetize that and therefore make that investment worthwhile. Anybody who works in software, and I mean anybody, even those people who are in favour of patents, know that that's not true in software. Innovation in software is small steps that draws on the work of many other people. It is not large-scale investment. If you're doing large-scale investment, that is to have your own copy of something that is different from somebody else's. The steps forward that people take are normally only ever minor steps. They often occur to many people at the same time because there are so many people drawing from a common gene pool of ideas to have their new ideas from. So this idea that somehow somebody's sitting there and comes up with something brilliant that they've spent several years working on, and that if they don't have patents they won't be able to do that, is just nonsense. So it's clear that no incentive is needed. Innovation, when you look at this community, this open source community, it is absolute proof that innovation is driven by higher motives. And that innovation is going to continue to be driven by higher motives, and those motives are going to increase. But we all know that this idea of innovation was never the real motive. The real one was tax revenue of a monarch, 400 years ago. And I think that it's now clear that patents are something quite different. They're closer now to being a nation-state instrument of economic warfare than they ever were to do something with promoting investment. If you see a dodgy patent office, you sometimes think, well, why doesn't that country fix that dodgy patent office? And the obvious reason is because they don't want to, because it creates a hegemony of their ideas across the world. So, again, speaking from experience rather than politics, I'm ultimately a pragmatist at heart. I often buy closed-source systems, I often use Apple computers and things, get into furious rows with people from Catalyst about doing this kind of stuff, because ultimately I'm a pragmatist in that way. But there's one thing that experience has told me, and that is that the internet will win. The internet has won every battle along the way, and it is an unstoppable unstoppable force. In the same way that electricity is an unstoppable force. If 100 years ago you were saying, this electricity stuff will just never catch on, it will never get anywhere, that's exactly the same way you ought to look at people as saying, well, open source, I'm not really sure about that. Openness, open communication, open data, I'm not really sure that's going to happen. The internet will win, and openness will come with it. Thank you.